What is up, beautiful people of the internet? I go by the name of Wesley, and today we are reacting to TierZoo's video, the Dinosaur Tier List. I've done 2 other TierZoo reactions. I loved them. You guys seem to really enjoy them too, and y'all requested this specifically. I wanted to be a paleontologist when I was 5. And I wanted to be a dentist and a professional soccer player at the same time, and I didn't think that those would be conflicting career paths. So I should be taken very seriously as to my input on the tier list. That being said, subscribe for more reactions. Let's hit it. I love these stuff. I love ranking things. I'm so curious what dinosaurs he's gonna pick. This game looks really fun. Can a developer just watch this video and make this, please? It looks amazing. Doesn't it? Like, I want to play this game. This looks so cool. Like a survival simulator where you can play... A survival simulator where you can play as different animals. And it's an MMO. That'd be sickening. That'd be so cool. Like the TierZoo. Like TierZoo. TierZoo should make a game called TierZoo. That'd be so cool.
Dinosaurs were some of the most powerful builds to ever be introduced to the game, while other factions like the Mammal Guild and Arthropod Guild have come up with some pretty impressive ones. On land, nothing has yet topped the sheer power of the Reptile Guild's greatest achievements. Even though their massive size is perhaps their most notable trait, there was also a ton of variety in the abilities and combat strategies that these builds employed. And so today I think it's finally time to release my dinosaur tier list. Obviously there's a ton of dinosaur builds, so there's no way I can cover all of them, but I definitely will try to hit the important ones. It's worth noting that the reign of the dinosaur faction lasted more than twice as long as the reign of the mammal faction that supplanted them. And so during this huge stretch of time, dinosaur maids basically tried out every conceivable strategy, and that's why there are so many builds to talk about. But as
how do you even start, right? Because that's so many, it's so many years, it's so much time. How would you even like narrow it down? And there's different like points in time. I feel like you would have to rank like the Jurassic period, which in and of itself is just a huge amount of time. But how do you like rank the different periods with each other? Because they were slightly different environmental factors and not all dinosaurs were interacting with each other. This is a really difficult tier list.
As always, we'll start from the bottom of the tier list and move up from there.
At
the bottom, we've got Dryosaurus and Camptosaurus.
Trash!
Two very similar herbivore builds with an interesting stat spread.
Fodder.
Dinosaurs are known for their immense strength, but neither of these builds boast any sort of offensive capabilities. Instead, they have a modest but below average defensive spread, decent mobility, and above average intelligence for a dinosaur. These builds took advantage of how powerful the other herbivore builds were by sticking by the bulkier ones and relying on them to defend the herd. They also took advantage of the fact that they were faster than other herbivores, even though their mobility was lower than most predator builds.
These guys are scumbags. So you're telling me these guys are total scumbags. They just hang out and let everybody else fight off. They're just total moochers. So they just hang out in the herd, let everybody else like fight them, and they're just like, we're here, not contributing, but we're surviving, living off of your guys' sacrifice to fight off the predators. And then, since they were slightly faster than those same herbivores that were protecting them, when stuff did go down, they were just like, okay, cool, good luck with that, bye, and they would just outrun them. It's like quintessentially that little thing where it's like you're hiking with your buddy in the woods, a bear comes across you, they start running, your buddy's like, I hope we can outrun this bear, and you go, haha, I just need to outrun you, sucker. That's so bad!
Their higher intelligence granted them more advanced perception, letting them function as the herd lookouts. But nonetheless, these builds were helpless on their own, and were
the herd lookouts, aka look out for them to just start running, because they're not warning your ass, because you're the bait!
Easy targets for predator mains if they were ever caught
good
undefended.
Karma, kill them.
The lack of self-sufficiency puts them in F tier, in my opinion. I think they realized this though, because later on, this faction started speccing into either extra armor on their heads or spikes on their thumbs, giving them much better options for dealing with aggressive players.
Spikes on their thumbs
tier, we've got 2 carnivore builds.
The
first being Coelophysis. Coelophysis was one of the first dinosaur builds that the devs introduced. And like all of the early dinosaurs, it really was nowhere near the power level of the ones that would be added to the game later in the Jurassic and Cretaceous expansions. The only reason it became such a popular and dominant build was because it starved and dehydrated more slowly than its non-dinosaur rivals. And this isn't to say that it didn't struggle to succeed too. It absolutely did, and often had to resort to team killing just to get by.
Betrayal.
It sort of dominated the early dino meta by default, so I'm not going to rate it any higher than D tier. Also in D tier we have
It kind of feels like a level 1 creature, doesn't it? It kind of feels like a level 1 creature. Like that's where you start the game playing. It doesn't feel like a fully realized build. It feels more like a blank slate that you spec into other things from, doesn't it?
Spinosaurus. Spinosaurus is a unique build that spec'd heavily into fishing abilities and aquatic adaptations, including the rare ability of electroreception, which helped it catch fish players even when they were in stealth mode.
That's so cool.
This is great for that specific application, but Spinosaurus mains weren't actually fully aquatic. They couldn't breathe underwater and still had to spend plenty of their gameplay dealing with the challenges of being a terrestrial build. And unfortunately, their stats and abilities leave a lot to be desired in terms of contending with the terrestrial meta at that time.
Because they're basically a walking dinosaur peacock with that giant thing flapping out of their back, right?
Because they'd spent so many evolution points adapting their build to be able to fish, they'd secured themselves a unique niche at the cost of being able to hold their own in general combat. They'd get bodied by most other carnivore mains and outsped by most herbivore mains, leaving them in an awkward position. If they'd had more time, they might have been able to gain enough experience to spec into a fully aquatic build. But unfortunately, the devs decided to up the overworld temperature, raising the sea levels but drying up the rivers, leaving the Spinosaurus player base without a niche. The lesson here is that if you ever find yourself speccing into the playstyle of an amphibian, you may want to reconsider how you're spending your evolution points. Last in D tier we have the Hadrosaurs.
Amphibians just
Now, I don't
trash.
have a ton to say about these builds. Generally, their main game plan is pretty simple. See a predator coming and run away. This is pretty similar to the Dryosaurus and Camptosaurus playstyle I mentioned in F tier, but instead of relying on the more powerful herbivores to defend them, they had the HP required to shrug off a hit or two,
so kind of
and actually had the mobility required to escape, assuming they saw the attack coming. Overall, this build was pretty easy to play, but had a low skill ceiling as well, since they had no actual combat abilities. All in all, there's a reason players consider Hadrosaurs more
That's how I
forgettable
punch in my dreams. I'm just like...
among dinosaurs.
Hello-fisted.
In C tier, we've got two of the most famous Jurassic builds. The first is Stegosaurus.
Ooh,
Taking
see?
a quick look at the Stegosaurus'
See? See?
stats, it's clear that this build was extreme on many fronts.
Intelligence.
It had one of the lowest intelligence levels of any dinosaur, and also didn't exactly have much in terms of mobility either.
Its brain was like this
However,
big.
it had pretty incredible combat stats and powerful abilities to back it up. Most notably, its backplates and Thagomizer.
Thagomizer? Why does a Thagomizer sound like a final weapon that you, like, unleash to just atomize things? Yeah, have you unlocked the Thagomizer yet?
Significantly reduce the chance of an attacker scoring a critical hit against them.
So what, they're
since
just
it's
dumb as
much harder
bricks?
to bite down on a Stegosaurus' weak point when there are plates in the way. Their backplates can also be flushed with blood to grant a large intimidation buff, which works great against predator and herbivore mains alike. The Thagomizer is one of the most unique weapons of any dinosaur build. The Thagomizer has one of the highest critical hit chances of any weapon in the game, often dealing enough damage to one-shot most players. Because it's a tail spike, this attack has a lot of reach, making approaching a defending Stegosaurus player extremely difficult.
It's funny because when they animate it, it looks like a spinning wheel kick. If you guys have ever seen a UFC fighter or just I guess any striking sport throw like a spinning kick, it kind of looks like that weirdly because they have to turn their back in order to like...
However, the strategy was by no means perfect. Their low mobility made fleeing from battle impossible, so if an enemy did know how to subvert its defenses,
and their bellies,
Stegosaurus
right,
mains would be out of options. And since their tails weren't long enough to cover an attack from the front, that was often their downfall.
Oh yeah,
Thankfully, their base game plan was relatively simple, so their low intelligence didn't hinder them too much. Also in C tier, we have every Stegosaurus main's arch-enemy, Allosaurus. The Allosaurus build was unique in that it actually invested very little into the bite attack, only having the bite strength of a lion. Instead, Allosaurus dealt damage by using its head like a battle axe, swinging its open jaw down onto an enemy player.
Just like Evander Holyfield.
Was nowhere near...
I'm sorry, that's like a boxing joke that nobody's gonna get. But Evander Holyfield, he was famous. He was a boxer. He was really, really good. But he was very famous because he would headbutt his opponents a lot, like just enough. And he would do it in a way that he had a lot of plausible deniability, so the refs wouldn't always call it. He's the guy that Mike Tyson bit the ear off of. That's probably how most people would know him. But he was infamous for doing that, and it was rumored that he on the heavy bag that boxers train their punches on, he would literally practice headbutts to like build these muscles and be able to just like dome people as he's boxing them. Whenever someone would try to get close to him, he would just go dome.
To the devastating power of some of the top tier dinosaur combat moves. It had the highest top speed of any build during its time, but had relatively low stamina, meaning it could only sprint for a short time, also similar to lions today. While one-on-one, Allosaurus tended to get bodied by the stronger herbivore players of its time. In packs, they could take down just about anything. Overall, a solid mid-tier, whose strategies got expanded upon and refined by the later dinosaur builds.
That makes sense.
In B-tier, we have a few builds which did the exact opposite of what Allosaurus did, in that they put a ton of evolution points into a single combat tactic. First, the build which spec'd into the claw skill tree, granting it the longest claws to ever exist in the game, Therizinosaurs. Therizinosaurs were excellent in 1v1 combat.
You know the girls with the nails? Like, you guys know what I'm talking about. Their nails are like this long. I don't know why. Those girls are the modern version of these dinosaurs.
Because their claws...
I'm always like, how do they wipe their butt? With those big nails, how do they wipe their butt?
Claws gave them incredible reach and damage.
Let's see these
for
claws.
Slicing at the heads of carnivore mains that were trying to bite them. Their slash attack was the strongest the game had ever seen. In fact, they put so many points into the claw skill tree
even the way
that
they walk.
Had none left over for teeth or mobility, and were actually forced to change teams from the carnivore side to the herbivore
Whoa.
side, making them the only build from the theropod faction to opt not to be a predator.
That's crazy.
This actually worked out really well for them, because they no longer had to compete with the other predator mains for XP, and were also taller than most herbivore players typically seen in the forest biomes. Sure, they were lacking in intelligence and mobility, and also couldn't actually gain any experience from the enemies that they defeated with their claws.
Why?
But all in all, they had a surprisingly effective
sense.
strategy.
You can't eat them.
Not a perfect defense, as they were definitely still vulnerable to coordinated assaults, but definitely an above average build. On the opposite end,
They even fight like the girls with those nails. Yeah. If they could just grab hair, this would be a perfect one-to-one comparison.
the spectrum from Allosaurus and Therizinosaurs, both of which had either weak or non-existent bite damage. We have the carnivore build that put all of its evolution points into maxing out the bite attack, the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
B
T-Rex
tier?
had the most powerful
T-Rex is B tier?
bite attack in the history of the game, able to take out any player it was able to bite in a single hit.
T-Rex
This also
is B
gave it the
tier,
ability
guys.
to crush bone, letting it access the XP-rich marrow inside, similar to what hyenas do in today's meta. T-Rex was a hybrid between a predator and scavenger build. It didn't have the greatest luck taking down the heavily armored herbivores of the Cretaceous expansion, but it could certainly defeat them if the T-Rex players worked in a group. And as a scavenger, its massive size gave it the ability to steal kills from other carnivore players who had no hope of surviving its devastating bite if they got in its way. T-Rex did, however, have to sacrifice all of its other offensive strengths in order to maximize its bite
that
damage.
makes sense.
Its arms were so short that its claw attack had pathetic range, making them useless both for holding prey and fighting rivals for territory.
I mean, honestly, I know it ripped off the T-Rex's arm, but does it matter? Like, these are useless. These don't do anything. They're kind of just like appendages, right? They're just kind of there to express themselves. Like,
and it also wasn't particularly fast outside of short bursts of speed. So if players saw it coming, which wasn't that hard because of its massive size, they wouldn't have too tough a time avoiding it. Still, with team strats, it was near unstoppable, and it always had the option to fall back on scavenging, so it was definitely a solid high tier. The last B tier build I want to talk about is Triceratops.
Triceratops is B tier? I was not anticipating this.
In terms of defense in a single direction, no build has ever come close to Triceratops. Their horns can deal massive damage in a single swing, even to giant carnivore builds like T-Rex. Looking at its stats, it's pretty clear that going head-to-head with this thing would end badly. However, one thing I've noticed is that players nowadays fail to remember its main drawback, low intelligence. This thing was pretty close to a modern-day opossum in terms of brain power, and as many of you should know from my Australia video, marsupials are some of the least intelligent mammals. People assume Triceratops behaved similar to a modern-day elephant, since both are about the same size and sport powerful front-facing weaponry. However, the herd behavior that makes elephants so...
Can we talk about these elephants? They crewed up. They crewed up. I love when animals can take defensive formations like this. They almost look like Romans hitting a shield wall, don't they? I wouldn't mess with them. These hyenas have no chance at all.
Powerful front-facing weaponry.
Are these hyenas?
However,
I think they
the
are.
herd behavior that makes elephants
Or
so
wild
untouchable
dogs,
by
maybe?
predators was absent in the Triceratops build, as they were mostly solitary.
They were
This was due to their low
solitary? I didn't
intelligence
know
stat.
that.
Because of that, they were high...
I was such a 8-year-old me. You're such a stupid paleontologist. You didn't know that. That makes way more sense. Because I was thinking, like, well, wouldn't they, like you said, shield wall, right?
Highly vulnerable from being attacked from behind.
Oh, that was terrible.
or
Why
from
would you play
multiple
by
angles at
yourself? That's
once.
awful.
Triceratops' low intelligence also meant that it was easily tricked into walking into ambushes set by carnivore mains, which pretty much always meant a game over for the Triceratops. As powerful as this build is, and it is powerful, don't get me wrong, I think it's definitely not a top tier dinosaur and caps out at B tier.
I think that's
Okay,
fair.
so in A tier we've got the dinosaurs, which were a
coordination.
bit smarter about how they invested their evolution points. First we have the Dromaeosaurus, the faction of dinosaurs that includes builds like Velociraptor, Deinonychus, and Utahraptor. These players made an interesting choice to forego the gigantism ability that made dinosaurs so dominant in the first place, and try their hand at more of an evasive rushdown playstyle, sacrificing both their HP and defense stats
We got the Zerg players.
to buff their mobility and DPS as best they could. Most notably, they spec'd into buffing a single claw on each foot, which had two important functions. The first being that it could deal massive slash and stab type damage, and the second being that it gave them the ability to hook onto players that they were targeting using the pounce attack. Overall, this build had much higher damage than normal for a build that size, and could easily take down players in a much higher weight class, especially if they attacked in a group, which they often did. They had the ability to weave in...
Dying like that's horrifying. It's like death by 1,000 cuts as you're slowly torn apart and you can't escape. I think that would be the most horrific way to go from all of the dinosaurs so far.
in and out of their opponent's attack range easily, letting them bait out and dodge attacks. The one main drawback to this build was that if it ever got careless, they could easily take lethal damage in a single hit. But overall, this faction was one of the most successful at the time and easily A tier. Also in A tier we have Carcharodontosaurus, a build very similar to T-Rex in terms of appearance, but with a slightly different plan of attack. Instead of investing purely into bite force, maxing out base damage, Carcharodontosaurus spent its evolution points speccing into advanced serrated teeth. This gave their bite attack an increased chance to cause the heavy bleed status effect, which would drain the target's HP and stamina over time. This was more cost effective than pure bite force, and let them retain enough evolution points to spec into claws too, giving them a more well-rounded combat style that could still cause lethal damage from a single bite.
So they basically hit one bite, let them walk off, and just follow their trail, kind of like modern hunters do.
This strategy is similar to the one seen employed by the Komodo dragon player base of today's meta. Carcharodontosaurus was also one of the tankier carnivore builds and could shrug off a hit or two even from the builds that would normally devastate anything that they landed a hit on. This made them extremely good at PvP against the other carnivore builds at the time, making them an easy high tier candidate. The next build I have in A tier is Ankylosaurus, perhaps the best tank build ever to exist in the game.
Yeah.
This build essentially took the Stegosaurus' strategy and cranked it up to the most extreme it could. Instead of backplates for intimidation, the Ankylosaur players spec'd into armor, and instead of tail spikes they opted for a club. Their armor was so impenetrable that it made attacks from even the strongest carnivore mains pretty laughable.
So you need to flip it.
While their club didn't have a high crit chance like the tail spikes did, it did do massive damage that could shatter bone, capable of crippling any player unfortunate to take a direct hit from it.
They were also, their armor was way more encompassing, so it was covered more on the sides. Stegosaurus was Stegosaurus was covered on the back, but its sides were available, which meant it was a relatively easy way to attack. This is kind of like a turtle, where if it sucks its limbs in, there's really not much surface to even get after, and its center of gravity is lower, so it's actually more difficult to flip over. Because that's the big problem with the Stegosaurus, right? The sides are vulnerable, and you can flip it.
Ankylosaurus was near invincible, except that it had one glaring flaw. Despite all of its defense and power, it was completely helpless if a player managed to flip it over.
But it's
For
less
that reason,
easy
I
to
can't
flip
place
than
it in top
Steggy.
tier, because a good top tier will have no surefire counterplay. Last in A tier, we have Troodon. The Troodon build was the only dinosaur build whose core strategy was based around the intelligence stat. Sure, other dinosaurs used team strategies or had advanced perception skills, both of which require some usage of intelligence, but Troodon was the only one to specifically tailor their build around having its brain be its best weapon. Troodon had to sacrifice a lot to get this. High intelligence requires a lot of calories to maintain, so getting the kills required to sustain both a large size and a large brain was impossible, meaning that they had to give up gigantism as a trait. So instead of powerful dagger-like claws, Troodon opted for smaller but opposable claws that could be used to pick up objects. This severely cut its potential in combat, but gave it a lot of options in terms of manipulating its environment to, for example, set up traps to catch players that would otherwise be able to evade them. It's very possible that if non-avian dinosaurs weren't banned in the Meteor Strike balance patch, Troodon players would have eventually leveled up their intelligence enough to become top tiers.
Horrifying.
Similar to humans. But even though it
Horrifying.
was starting to gain the power to dominate its environment, it still had no way to combat the other top tiers, aside
That
from
makes
just running
sense.
away. So it definitely wasn't S tier. In
It was
S tier,
kind of like it was not playing the same game as everybody else. It was like, okay, I'm going to play in the same server, but I'm going to not engage in PvP, and I'm just going to like completely do my own thing over here. It's like you're on a PvP Minecraft server, but you don't want to actually do that. You just want to play just normal Minecraft, and you're like, no! I'll play in the PvP server, and I'll try to figure out a way I can just do normal Minecraft over here by myself without getting killed.
we have the most overpowered dinosaur faction of all.
What?
The Sauropods.
Really?
Sauropods had every tool they needed to counter all other dinosaur builds.
Really?
They had the maximum HP stat possible for a terrestrial build.
They're huge.
And because they used the herd strategy, oftentimes this meant that if a sauropod player was caught off guard and was under attack by several carnivore players, it could usually tank enough hits that its teammates would have time to rescue it.
Sauropod.
And of all the dinosaurs, sauropods also had the largest attack range. Their whip-like tails may have not had the same damage per hit that Stegosaurus or Ankylosaurus did, but they were still plenty powerful, able to knock down enemies well out of reach of a counterattack. And if they did get too close, a sauropod's stomp attack was literally the most devastating move in the game, knocking the target down and dealing lethal damage. Lastly, their extreme height gave them a massive advantage for avoiding stealth attacks, as they could see much further than other players. In terms of land superiority, sauropods truly were the most overpowered dinosaurs of all time.
Really?
It's unfortunate that the devs chose to ban the dinosaurs during the KT balance patch, but alas, the meta was getting stale, so I understand why. Hopefully you enjoyed this look back at the
That was
Mesozoic meta.
amazing.
If you enjoy watching videos about dinosaurs, there are a bunch of great documentaries I can recommend. For example, if you're curious about Troodon and why it was the smartest dinosaur ever, I have to recommend Leaps in Evolution, a documentary detailing the evolution of brains and intelligence. But if you just want a good, fun dinosaur story, one of my personal favorites is The Ballad of Big Al, a documentary that follows the life story of a single Allosaurus as it learns to hunt and survive in the Jurassic. Both of these great films have recently
That was so
just
cool.
support-
I love TierZoo. TierZoo's so amazing. Thank you guys so much for watching. I go by the name of Wesley. If you want to see more reactions, make sure you subscribe down below. And please let me know, what TierZoo video would you like us to react to next? Because I am loving reacting to these. It's like edutainment, but it's also talking about the meta, which I just love talking about. I love anything competitive when it starts to break down into the meta and the game theory behind why it works and why it's good and whatnot. I can't disagree with his list. And his reasoning was on point. 8-year-old me, I realized I didn't know nearly as much about dinosaurs as I thought I did going into the video. That was so much fun. Thank you guys so much for watching. We are planning to do live streams starting next week, so make sure you subscribe so we can actually watch stuff together and talk about it. Yeah, I hope you guys have a gorgeous day. Take care of yourself and have a beautiful day. A gorgeous day and a beautiful day. Same thing, but whatever. Take care of yourself. I'm Wesley, and I'm